This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Christina.
And Angela.
And we are here with Silent Witness, Cold Case and True Crime Podcast. How are you, Angela? How's everything?
I'm doing fine. How's everybody else doing?
Good,
How
I
are you?
guess. I'm good. I'm ready for some cases. A new case today.
I'm ready.
You ready? Okay. So this will be a cold case. So, let's go. Let's talk about this cold case from 1988.
Okay.
You know, I like to do a little history lesson. So,
all right.
A little history for today. In 1988, George W. Bush he won the presidential election. If you didn't know, he was Ronald Reagan's vice president. The Summer Olympics were held in Seoul, South Korea. The first World's AIDS Day was held. You know, if you remember, that was in the height of HIV and AIDS. 1988. Yes. Also, the floppy disk was becoming more known. For those that don't know what a floppy disk is, because, you know, these kids, they don't know.
These millenniums, they don't know what a floppy disk is.
A floppy disk holds storage from a computer, and it was invented actually in 1971. Computers were emerging at this time, but were mostly in companies and larger companies. You know, us, we didn't have any clue, you know, and of course the internet wasn't a thing. So.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So topping the music charts was George Michael and Guns N' Roses. And at the movies was Land Before Time and Rain Man. Remember Land Before?
Ooh, Rain Man. I still look at that now.
Do you remember Land Before Time, the dinosaur movie? Oh,
yes.
So cute. Okay.
The Rain Man is my favorite.
Yeah, it's a good movie. Okay, so let's jump to Fort Worth, Texas. Fort Worth is a city just west of Dallas. It's known for the stockyards. Used to be the center of the Texas cattle trade. Today, it's a cultural epicenter with many museums and nightlife, a lot of nightlife, and a lot of honky tonks. One of the world's largest honky tonks, Billy Bob's, is there.
Ooh.
The population in 1988 was around 400 to 500,000. Today, it's about 1 million. So,
wow.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to jump to Carol Lee Preslar. She was born September 22nd in 1960 in Tarrant County. Her parents were Hosea, and I hope I'm saying that right. I'm sorry if I'm not. And Mary Preslar. Carol was kind. She was a strong-willed. She was smart, funny, just an entertainer, outgoing entertainer. She is described as very spirited. How would you describe somebody spirited, Angela?
Outgoing.
Yeah.
Good vibes.
Yeah.
Good-natured.
Yeah. Strong-willed. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a teen, she did have a strong personality, which could and does lead to some problems, such as rebellion, you know. By this point, her parents had divorced and her mom was left to raise her, and began to have a hard time with her, you know, as most teenage girls.
Right.
Or have issues. You know, mom's newly single, so she began going out a little bit, and Carol was not real happy about it. Now, Carol did have 2 sisters, but they were quite a bit older. They were, you know, Susie it was about 10 years older than her. And they helped raise Carol. You know, when Carol was born and they were 10, that's a baby. That's a baby doll.
Right.
You know, so they, you know, they were old enough to help. So Mary, of course, was having a hard time with Carol, and, you know, there were some issues there. Nothing. You know, we look back on it and it was just ordinary teenage stuff. But for the time, you know, back then it was, teens are way different today than they were back then. So.
Definitely.
Yeah. But mom had a opportunity to move to California for work and wanted to go, but wasn't going to take Carol.
Oh.
So Susie, her older sister, was married and had kids of her own and was living in Utah. So Susie took her in. Her older sister took her in.
Okay.
And they, like I said, they were really close, and that she was just a mom figure to Carol.
Okay.
Now, I expect Carol was not real happy about mom leaving and going to California, because Carol apparently really wanted to go with her and even begged her and said, "Hey, I'll be good if you take me."
And you have to look at it like this: California, Utah. California, Utah.
Yeah. Or even Fort Worth. I mean, I'd pick California.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the promise is, she promised, "Hey, I'll be good if you take me," and mom was like, so she goes and lives with Susie in Utah. So Carol moves in with her, completes high school, begins college in Utah. Now, so she's in her early 20s. So Carol decides to move back to Texas for a fresh start. Once, and again, she was in her early 20s. Once she was back in Fort Worth area, in the Tarrant County area, she didn't miss a beat. She began hanging around with old friends. She made new friends.
Mm-hmm.
And around this time is when Carol met her boyfriend, Woody. Now, he was 15 years her senior.
Oh, my.
So he was quite a bit older.
Oh, yes.
Now, he seemed to genuinely care for Carol. He had a business. He had a nice home in a nice area of Fort Worth, and he treated her really well. He protected her, very caring, loving toward her. And the family really liked him.
Okay.
They dated for about 3 years. And by 1988, she stayed for the most part with Woody in his home, but she had her own home, her own apartment in the Avion. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Apartment complex in Fort Worth. Now, Carol was attending UT Arlington, and she was about 27 at this time, and studying. She was working as a cocktail waitress at Feathers Lounge, which is just a cocktail lounge. It's not a. It's just a cocktail lounge.
Okay.
It's not a shady strip club or anything.
Okay.
As far as I could tell, it's not. And none of my research suggested that. And again, she was at UT Arlington studying to become a stockbroker.
Oh, okay.
So she was making her way. She was paying for her own college, doing really well. Boyfriend,
Yeah. She has some real good goals.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Susie, who still lived in Utah, was planning a trip to Texas to visit family because, there's other family that lived here and to visit Carol. So Carol was looking forward to visiting with Susie. Susie was running a few days late. I guess they were driving from Utah to Texas, I think.
Okay.
So it's going to take a little bit. It's a long road trip. Susie was supposed to be staying with her grandmother. So when she came to Texas, she was staying with their grandmother, Carol and Susie's grandmother. Okay. And, Carol was calling, "Hey, is Susie there yet?" And you got to remember there's no cell phone. So she can't call Susie on the road. So she got to call Grandma. Has Susie made it?
Woo! Doing it the old way.
Yeah, the old school way.
Yes.
But, at this time, she's, Carol's still working and having to go to school. She still got to pay the bills. So, she didn't take off. So on June 23rd, 1988, Carol worked her shift at Feathers Lounge and decided to hang out with a coworker named Belinda. They decided to go to another club called Wild West Club, which is just a few miles from the Feathers Lounge. I guess it's like a honky tonk. I'm guessing by the name Wild West. I don't know. They hung out and decided to go back to Belinda's apartment. And this was around 2:30 in the morning. They went back to Belinda's apartment, and around 2:30 in the morning, Carol decided to head to her apartment. And this was according to Belinda.
Okay.
So this puts us in the early morning hours of June 24th, 1988. So around 3 o'clock in the morning or so. And so this would be the last time Carol was seen alive.
Oh.
So according to the reports that I read, a downstairs neighbor woke up to noises And this was probably about 3:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Woke up to hearing some noises coming from Carol's apartment, which would be right above his. The neighbor
Okay.
heard noises like screaming and crying, which lasted about 30 minutes. The neighbor also reported around 7 a.m. that he continued to hear crying for about an hour, and then heard Carol's apartment door open and shut, looked out and saw a man leaving the apartment carrying something.
Oh.
And by this time, the neighbor did not hear any sounds coming from the apartment like he heard earlier.
Okay.
But he saw the man put something in a red car and return back to the apartment. Now, you may wonder why wasn't 911 called?
Well, I'm of this nature right here. When you see something, say something.
The
Okay,
neighbor,
go ahead.
the neighbor thought it was just an argument. And I did read, one report. I don't know how true. I don't know if it's a legit. So allegedly this neighbor had called 911 before on another incident, had nothing to do with Carol, just earlier.
Okay.
And got beat up because he falsely called the police on somebody who he thought it was a domestic, and I don't know. So he was kind of gun shy.
He was kind of hesitant.
Yeah.
Okay.
And often people are scared to call the police because they, you may think you're hearing something and it may not be what you're hearing, and because
there is such thing as a wellness check. You can say, hey, I heard wellness check. So you can do a wellness check.
But would you have known about that in 1988? I don't know that I would have.
Yeah.
And especially if you had an incident where you did call the police on somebody and then they got mad at you, you may be like questioning.
Well, did it happen to him or happen to someone else?
No, it happened to him.
Oh, really?
But it had nothing to do with Carol. So like he called the police on something else, on some other incident.
And then he was attacked.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Now that will make you kind of
right.
Yeah.
So I can see his point. Yeah. So let's go back. Susie finally arrived in Texas. Went to Grandma's house. And had realized that nobody had heard, including Woody and Susie and Grandma hadn't heard from Carol in a day or two.
Mm-hmm.
So Woody was worried, and this is all according to Susie's daughter. So she's kind of the spokesperson of the family, but now,
right.
Susie was also worried because no one had heard from Carol. Woody decided to go to her apartment and check on her, and he had a spare key. He had a key, his boyfriends have keys. He entered the apartment and the feeling that we always hear about, just that sinking feeling,
gut feeling.
Yeah, that he just had a bad feeling. He walked to her bedroom and found Carol partially clothed, beaten, bloodied, lying on her bed.
Oh no.
He ran to the manager's apartment, and the manager called 911. He was just panicked, in an absolute panic.
Of course.
And I'll explain why he didn't call 911 himself from Susie's apartment in just a second.
Okay.
But you got to remember, there's no cell phones back then. So it's not like he could just...
It has to be a landline, as we call them now, landline.
Landline, yeah. So at that point, too, as the police were coming in, Woody also called Susie saying, hey, Carol's dead.
That's not good news to just hear right out like that.
Yeah. No, when you come to town anyway, as police arrived, they noted how violent this crime was. And investigators feel that Carol was tortured. And if you remember the noises,
right,
they believe she was tortured prior to being killed. Investigators feel whoever did this wanted to torture and demean her, and that was the goal. Autopsy revealed that the cause of death was strangulation, and at the time of her death would have been the early morning hours of June 24th, 1988. So the early morning hours, 6, 7, when the noises stopped. And it makes sense hearing what the neighbor had said.
Right.
So it was hard to find exactly, what the scene was, but from reports that I read, Carol was gagged, brutalized, and raped.
Yeah. That's probably the stuff he was taking back to his car, whatever he used.
Well, no,
The
I'll tell
tor-
you what he was taking back to his car.
Okay. Okay.
I did read that a palm print was found at the scene and writing that was demeaning.
Mm-hmm.
No specifics were given, just some writing at the apartment.
Okay.
Now let's go back to why didn't Woody call 911 from Carol's phone? Because Carol had a phone and an answering machine. Well, that was missing along with the answering machine.
Oh, the person took.
Yes. The answering
I
machine and the phone were gone.
Okay.
So that's why he ran to the managers to call.
Right.
So, the man was putting, that the neighbor saw was putting something in a car. Well, it was likely Police feel this was someone Carol may have known.
Yeah. A lot of times it is someone you know.
Yeah, due to
someone you know, someone you met.
Something you met, yeah. So, it was a lengthy murder, meaning she was tortured for hours, raped, and eventually strangled.
Yeah. Because before the neighbor heard anything, can you imagine what was probably going on before he heard any noises?
Well, by the time I think he heard the noises around 3:30.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the timeline from 2:30 when she left Belinda's apartment and got to her apartment, he was probably waiting on her.
Yeah.
So, okay. So as we have said in previous podcasts, investigators look at the closest and then go out like a circle. And that's how they investigate these. So you may ask about Woody. Of course, he was the first suspect. Police normally look at the closest to the victim. They focused so much on him that other leads were often ignored.
Oh, okay.
Woody was eventually cleared. He passed a polygraph. He passed extensive investigation and was cleared of this. It's also noted Carol dealt with a lot of people at her job and at school, at a cocktail lounge.
Right.
Yeah. So it didn't have to be somebody she knew intimately or personally. It could have been somebody she met that night.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody hit on her at the club and she said, I got a boyfriend.
She rejected them.
Yeah. One thing I found disturbing in this case is shortly after the murder, some sicko, and of course this is alleged, so I don't get sued, some sicko, disgusting freak drew a depiction of Carol murdered in the bathroom where she worked.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's mean-spirited.
That's more than mean. That's just a sick, disgusting, vile person to do that. Because it's not even a person, an animal, a beast. But I mean, you got to think they're all shooken up and sad. They worked with her. Everybody liked her there, and they got to go in the bathroom. And you got to think too, we had no cell phones back then, so nobody could just snap a picture. So there's no real record of this. It was cleaned pretty quick, first reaction, we're going to clean it. And, so it was never captured in a picture. So, and again, that's alleged. The case eventually grew cold. A new detective began looking at the case in 2001 and saw some interesting details missed by the original investigators, like I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
So there was a neighbor, not the witness, another neighbor of Carol's who reportedly who was taking creepy pictures of women at the apartment complex. And this was reported to police around that time. This creepy man, and he matched the description of the man loading something in the red car.
Oh.
And this guy was, and I have his name, but it's a little bit down. But this guy was eventually arrested and charged with Carol's murder. Okay.
Based on
witness testimony from 13 years earlier. Now that's the problem. That's the problem. So
that's what I'm saying based on what evidence, what?
Based on he's a creep, taking creepy pictures. There wasn't anything.
Yes.
We do have DNA in this case. She was raped.
Okay.
And there's probably other DNA.
What happened to the fingerprint?
That we've got. And the DNA was not tested. But then we didn't have DNA testing in 88. But we did in 2001.
Right.
Plus, there were issues with the man that they arrested. Eyewitnesses 13 years earlier, they weren't reliable. Eyewitness testimony has been proven scientifically it's not reliable.
That's right.
So, and a lot of people have been convicted and found innocent after serving a lot of prison time. They were wrongfully convicted because
Based
of that.
on eyewitness.
Yeah.
Yep.
So by now, the man, his name was Marcus Brooks. He had bonded out of jail at the time and was never indicted. So he bonded out of jail, and then the DNA, the DA wanted to run the DNA test against the man, and the man eventually was cleared through DNA testing.
Okay.
So he wasn't the killer. The family of Carol believe the police mishandled the investigation. One report I read, they feel like it had something to do with her job as a waitress, and because they feel like the police mishandled it because of her job as a cocktail waitress. So
the way they judged her?
Yeah. Because you got to think in 88, it was a much different time.
That's right.
Than it is today. If I was a cocktail waitress, nobody would think twice of it. You think about it in 1988, and it was a little bit more seedier. If that makes sense. So they feel like that maybe because of that, so a lot of victim blaming.
Of course.
I don't care what she did. She still didn't deserve what happened to her.
Yeah.
Being raped, and if you remember, being raped back then was seen as, what did she do?
What did she do? What was she wearing? Did she entice him? Yes, it was. If you were raped in those days and beyond, it was, what did you do? What kind of overtures that you make toward that person to lead them on, or
And she was in her 20s, and she went out to clubs and was a 20-year-old girl, like we all were. So what did she do? Did she dance?
What did she do to entice him to do that?
Yeah. And this is absolutely wrong. We know this now. We knew it then, and it's wrong then. It's wrong today. It didn't matter what she did.
A lot of cases back then were mishandled because of that kind of thinking.
There was a movie.
A lot of women did not get justice because of that kind of thinking.
There was a movie that was based on a true thing that Jodie Foster was in. I can't think of the name.
The Accused.
Yeah. And that was the exact same scenario.
That's right.
Okay. According to reports I read, there is a lot of evidence in this case that has not been tested in 2025.
Really?
Now, as I'm looking into Fort Worth cold case unit, I'm looking at another case for a future episode. Same thing. Same thing. A lot of evidence hadn't been tested. And I know it costs a lot of money, but there are grants out there. So even as of 2022, much of the evidence had not been tested in this case. One new technology that needs to be done in this case, just because you test the DNA doesn't mean you're going to get your killer. They have to be in CODIS. And if they're not, then they're not going to get a match.
It's not. Right.
But how do we catch the Golden State Killer? Forensic, genetic, genealogy, DNA analysis.
Yikes.
So that is where you look for family members who've given their DNA to 23andMe or Ancestry, and then you go down the list from there.
Right.
That's how they catch a lot of killers today, is through that new technology. It costs a lot of money that, according to what I've read, Fort Worth police do not have. But it needs to be top priority.
So when you say a lot of money, like how much? I mean, how much would something like that cost? Manpower and everything like that?
That I'm not sure. I should have researched the cost of it. But there are grants, federal grants that I read every day that police departments get for testing. And you can, use
Is it the testing that costs a lot of money or the manpower that you have to put behind it?
Probably both.
Okay.
And then plus you got to do the genealogy testing if it's not in CODIS, and that's got to be sent. And
Right.
Anyway, I'm hoping, I know that there are grants to fund this, but it needs to be done. We need to get some of these 80, they have so many cases from the 80s and 70s and 60s
Mm.
that have not been
The
solved.
families don't have closure.
Right. And there may be a donation thing. A lot of departments, larger departments, have donations where people can donate. So if you'd like to
Mm-hmm.
donate, call Fort Worth PD and cold case unit and see if they take donations to get testing done. But there's a lot of money in Texas, especially in Fort Worth. That's a pretty rich area. You know, we need to get this case solved. But in the meantime, DNA, as we know, takes a long time to test. It's not
Mm-hmm.
something that's overnight. So we need leads, period. We got to get this case moving. Okay. We got to, we got to get it moving. There's somebody out there knows something.
Mm-hmm.
Carol was murdered in such a horrific, brutal way that nobody deserves. Nobody deserves that. Her family.
No one deserves murder, period.
No.
But I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Her family has been devastated all these years later. You know, Susie was traumatized for the rest of her life and fought for years and years and years for justice.
Mm.
Both of Carol's parents are now deceased.
Wow.
I am unsure about Susie. As of 2022, she was in her 70s and kind of distanced herself from the case. And so her daughter has taken it over.
Right.
Her daughter's Jody, and she's taken up the fight for justice. She's become the family spokesperson.
Advocate.
Yes. Yeah. Today, Carol would have been 64 years old.
Wow.
And this crime occurred 37 years ago. It is time for Carol to get justice and for her family to know a killer is off the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Carol's life was cut so short, and yet the killer has gone on for 37 years to live.
You're right.
And not in jail, as far as we know. He may be in jail. We don't know.
Yeah, for other things, because usually they don't stop at just one thing when they commit crime. They continue, and continue.
Not usually, but
I'm talking about other crimes.
Yeah. So somebody out there knows something. Like I've always said, somebody was in a bar drunk, running their mouth, girlfriend. I did this once before. I can do it again. You know how these fools act. So if you know something, call Crime Stoppers at 817-469-8477. And you can report anonymously. Leave a tip anonymously. Or
bring justice to that family.
Call the Fort Worth Cold Case Unit at 817-392-4307. Or you can email them coldcase@ftworthpd. So ftworth, spell out worth, ftworthpd.com.
Right.
And let's get this case solved. I mean, this is too long. This we have DNA. We can solve this case. This case is solvable. So, what do you think? Any closing? What do you think, Angela?
Well, her parents are deceased. Her sister has taken up this fight, and her family, her parents never got justice for this. And so let's give her sister justice to close this case out so they can have closure.
I agree with you. 100%.
And so someone that did this terrible thing can be brought to justice and, and pay for something that they did, so if you know something, say something, speak up.
Yeah. And call Crime Stoppers. Again, that's 817-469-8477. So call Crime Stoppers, leave an anonymous tip. They just need a tip. Even if you don't think it's important, even if you don't think it matters, it might.
Yes.
It might. Okay, well, that wraps up this episode, Angela. Follow us on all our social medias, TikTok, Silent Witness TX, and then Silent Witness Texas on Instagram. Follow us if you want us to look into a case. We'll be happy to. Leave us a message.
And if you know anybody that was in that scene, going to that same club or wherever she was, relay the information to them. If you know some of your relatives, hey, my relatives hung out at that place right there. Let them know what's going on.
Yeah. there was other people at that club. What happened at that club? You know, hopefully we hope Fort Worth PD went to the club and talked to people, but I don't have any information on that. So, okay. Well, that's wraps up this case. And thank you everybody for listening, and share this and like our podcast, and let's get this thing trending. Get this case solved.
So,
okay. Bye everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.